Can I actually recreate a convincing 1960s recording using the same limitations that engineers had back then? Today, I'm going to be attempting to record a song to sound exactly like the 1960s, with the biggest limitation being I only get 4 tracks. Now, at the very end of this video, we're going to do a comparison between the digital version and the 1960s style version to see how much the production alone can actually transform the sound. So to pull this off, I'm going to have to use the same limitations that engineers had back in the 60s, which means being very, very careful with the way that tracks are recorded and combined. Now, I fully intend to record more than 4 tracks, but the way it has to be done is actually quite difficult. A lot of big studios in the 60s actually ran 2 4-track machines, so tracks could be recorded on one machine and then some to a singular track on the second machine. This meant you could record 4 tracks in one, and you were still saving the original tracks. That way, if you needed to rebalance something, you still had them. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna record the claps and then the tambourine. Now, once those are recorded, we'll sum them to a spare channel on the first machine. Then with the remaining 3 channels, I'll be able to record the kick, snare, and the overhead. And once all of that's done, we can send all of the percussion to one channel on the second machine. For the production of the drums, I'm keeping it pretty simple. I've got a mono overhead, a kick, and a snare mic, and this is going to allow us to consolidate it to one track by keeping it mono. In general, the drums will be very much low pass. We're taking a lot of the high end out, and then we're going to be bussing everything to a lot of spring reverb. Now, the key to tracking a convincing 60s drum is to keep it pushed back in the mix. You don't want heavy transients because you don't really want a lot of punch here. Now it's probably a good time to talk about the panning. Back in the 60s, most consoles didn't actually have the panoramic pots that we're used to today. They had these 3-way switches in which you could pan everything hard left, hard right, or straight down the middle. That's why when you listen to a lot of records from the 60s, you'll hear things like the drums and the bass being panned hard one way, maybe the guitars and the keys pan hard the other way. Now, when I was working out how I was going to record this track, I originally wanted to combine all of the guitars together, but because the pannings differed, I couldn't actually consolidate that to one mono track. So instead, I'm going to group the acoustic, bass, and piano together since they're all going to be panned in the center. Then we can sum those to the second channel on the second machine. Okay, so I've got the acoustic here set up. We're running it through my condenser mic here. This is a WA87R2. The goal with this track is to go for that hard-hitting rock and roll style acoustic strumming part. I want it to be a little bit messy. I'm gonna strum it pretty hard because I want it to interact with the tape. I'm trying to get a lot of tape saturation from this. As far as the production goes, I've basically just got a little bit of EQ, but a very little amount of compression because again, I want the natural dynamics of what I'm playing to get compressed by the tape. For the bass, I'm going to be recording my Hofner. I'm going to be pushing a lot of the mids and really just cutting a lot of the low end. So in preparation for this challenge, I've been listening to a lot of 60s records just to kind of calibrate myself. Engineers back in the 60s were very, very careful with the way that they handle low end. There's really 2 reasons for this. Sub bass takes up a lot of energy, which can easily eat up headroom on tape and cause saturation. Now, another issue actually had to do with vinyl. Too much low end could actually make the record grooves too wide, and that actually caused playback issues. So most mixes were designed around this with tighter low end and just in general very little sub bass. For the lead guitars, I'm going for that old American tweed tube amp where basically I'm just driving it to the point of getting that natural fuzz. Both of these guitars are basically the same. There's a lead part and then there's a part that harmonizes with it. The only thing I'm changing is the cabinet, just to give it a little bit more separation. So for the guitars, I'll be recording them onto channels 1 and 2 of the first machine and then summing that to the third channel on the second machine. Now the reason I'm not recording more instruments in this balance is because the panning we'll do later in the mix needs to be aligned. Okay, so I want to add a little farfisa to the mix. Now this is going to be panned against the electric guitars to try and give just a little bit more balance to the panning. As far as the sound's concerned, this is kind of what I've got. So yeah, once that's in there, it should be pretty much good to go. So let's go ahead and record it. So before we compare the digital mix with the 1960s style version, I did want to reflect a little bit on this experiment. Now this is a pretty difficult challenge to pull off. I actually spent quite a bit of time mapping this session out to try and get it all to work. There's so many times where I'd get to the end and then I realized I had completely left a very important instrument out and I didn't have any tracks left. Another issue I ran into, I just didn't think about it until I started mapping this out, was just the way that panning was going to affect things. Because so many sound sources are being summed to a mono channel, they have to be pan aligned in the mix. If not, you can't actually sum them down to a mono channel. So that really limits your options when it comes to the recording plan, which goes to show just how important it is to actually map these things out. So that way you're being as efficient as possible with your recording. So with that in mind, let's take a listen between the two mixes and see just how much the production alone can transform the sound. All right, so let me know down below in the comments what you guys thought. Did it sound like the 60s to you, or was I way off? Hopefully this has inspired someone to actually try this challenge because it was difficult, but I really did have a lot of fun putting this together. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I highly recommend you check out my video where I tried recording a song like it's 1976. As always, I appreciate you guys for hanging out, and I will see you on the next one.